The stars outside the viewport glimmered like silent witnesses to 100 wars. Inside the observation deck of the Nexus Judicator, the air was tight with unease. Officers spoke in clipped tones. Soldiers kept glancing at the steel doors, and even the sentry droids hummed with a low-frequency alertness. Something was on board. Not a weapon, not exactly. Something worse. Kayla stood motionless at the center of the room, her hands at her sides, her back straight. She wore no armor. Just a matte black suit woven with environmental fibers from her homeworld, Gara Prime, known more commonly as Deathworld 9. The kind of planet where gravity cracked bones, and the rain melted skin. The Federation had catalogued it as uncolonizable. Kayla had called it home. She was young. That detail caught most observers off guard. Perhaps 20 standard cycles, her build wiry rather than brutish, her face unreadable. But there was something in her stillness, something no one could describe cleanly. Officers stopped mid-sentence around her. Marines who had faced insurgents in the Black Nebula turned their eyes when she passed. It wasn't fear. It was something older. Instinct. Rear Admiral Doval observed her from behind a transparent shield. "She hasn't moved in 10 minutes. She doesn't need to," his aide murmured. "She's just listening." The Deathworlder didn't speak unless asked a direct question. Even then, her replies were short, factual, and delivered without inflection. When she had first arrived on the Judicator under sealed order from Central Command, the briefing logs had been heavily redacted. Only a phrase remained: observe. Do not provoke. She had not asked why she was summoned. She had not reacted when she was issued a bunk separate from the rest of the crew. And she had not flinched when shown a holographic file of the Apex warlord, Korthuan. The Apex were the result of centuries of bioforging. Clad in living armor, bred for dominance, their soldiers had ended revolts with their bare hands. Korthuan was their masterpiece. 7 feet tall, voice like splitting rock, and undefeated in over 100 declared duels. Now he was en route to the Judicator, demanding a Federation opponent to test the mettle of lesser species. No one volunteered. Kayla did. Doval hadn't even asked. She had overheard the open channel and stepped forward. "I'll face him," she said. Not a question. Not bravado. Just fact. Doval had stared at her. "Why?" "He needs to lose," she answered. No further explanation. Now, as the shuttle bearing Korthuan approached the docking bay, tension pulsed through the corridors like radiation. Officers whispered that this was suicide. That someone had sent her here as a joke or a death sentence. Kayla remained unmoved. Her thoughts were not on Korthuan. Not on the crowd that would gather. She remembered instead the jungle wind on Gara Prime, the scent of iron bark and predator musk. She remembered being 9 years old and hiding for 3 nights under the corpse of a bladeshade beast, because the larger one hadn't left yet. Every second had been silence. Breath control. Perfect stillness. That was when she had learned. Waiting wasn't weakness. Waiting was patience sharpened to a blade. The doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss. A lieutenant stepped in. "He's arrived. The match is in 1 hour." Kayla nodded once. The arena was a converted loading bay reinforced with shield emitters and impact foam. Crowds of dignitaries, officers, and war analysts gathered behind glass. Wagers were placed quietly. None favored the girl. Inside the prep room, Kayla sat cross-legged, her breathing slow, her expression blank. Her handler, a scientist named Rel, watched her from a corner, datapad forgotten in his lap. "You don't have to win," he said quietly. "Just don't die. No one expects you to." Kayla looked at him, not coldly, but with a kind of tired comprehension. "I didn't come to survive." Rel swallowed. "Then why?" She didn't answer. She stood. The corridor to the arena was empty. Footsteps echoed behind her. Korthuan's approach, heavy and arrogant. His stride spoke of wars won before they began. Kayla stepped into the light of the arena, her boots silent on the alloy floor. Across from her, the warlord emerged. He smiled when he saw her. "This is your champion?" he roared, voice booming over the comms. "You insult me." Kayla said nothing. He spread his arms. "You should run now, girl. Before you break." Still, she said nothing. The announcer began the countdown. A silence fell. Corthuan shifted his stance, ready to lunge. But Kayla didn't move. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Unblinking. Watching. Corthuan frowned. And in that moment, every observer in that arena realized they were not watching a girl who had come to die. They were watching something far more dangerous, a predator who knew exactly when to strike. The silence stretched 1 second longer. And then she moved. The Apex Warlord removed his outer armor with ceremonial deliberation, letting each plated segment crash to the floor like declarations of supremacy. His bare chest, webbed with scars and chitin-like muscle, flexed with anticipation. The spectators behind the observation glass flinched at every motion, not because they feared him, though most did, but because they couldn't reconcile the mismatch before them. On one side, Corthuan, a living weapon crafted through centuries of apex genetic refinement. On the other, Kayla, a thin silhouette of a girl, her skin unarmored, her stance unarmed. Corthuan flexed his neck, vertebrae cracking like gunshot. "You still have time to kneel," he offered, voice rich with mockery. "I'll make it painless." Kayla blinked once. She didn't answer. Her silence now seemed less like defiance and more like inevitability. It had weight. Corthuan stepped forward, lowering his center of gravity into a grappler's crouch. His feet dug into the deck plating, claws grinding metal. He was fast. Everyone knew that. Not just strong, not just cruel, fast. Against any opponent with hesitation, he would close the gap in under 2 seconds. Kayla remained motionless. In the viewing room, Admiral Doval stood with his hands clasped behind his back. "Scan her vitals," he ordered. The med officer tapped through a readout. "Pulse steady. No adrenal spike. She's calm." "Impossible," muttered someone nearby. "She's facing a biological tank." "She's watching," said Rel quietly, eyes never leaving the screen. "That's what she does. She's letting him show everything." Corthuan began a slow circle around her, feet stomping like tribal drums. His movements were deliberate, designed to provoke. She didn't follow him. Her body didn't pivot. Just her eyes, tracking him with a predator's precision. He grinned wider, exposing a row of bone-spurred teeth. "I've killed real warriors, you know. Kings. Champions. Not feral girls who don't know which end of a blade to hold." Kayla's body shifted a fraction. Her left foot rotated 4 degrees. Her chin tilted. Corthuan saw it. He charged. To the untrained eye, it was a blur. 7 feet of engineered muscle, hurtling forward like a missile. The air snapped with displacement. He led with his shoulder, planning to drive her into the ground and end the spectacle before it began. Kayla didn't dodge. She moved into him. 1 step, no wasted motion. Her right leg snapped up from a planted pivot, not with the arc of someone lashing out in anger, but with the clinical economy of a sculptor striking marble. Her heel collided with Corthuan's lower jaw. There was no scream, no struggle, only a crack that echoed across the chamber, sharp and absolute. His body twisted in the air, arms limp, legs folding inward. He hit the floor with a sound like collapsing steel. The room was silent. Kayla exhaled. Corthuan didn't move. Rel stood frozen behind the observation pane, unable to look away. His mandibles broken, he whispered, watching the med drones rush in. "And see 5 vertebrae fractured. He's paralyzed." "She didn't kick him," someone muttered, disbelief in their voice. "She dismantled him." Kayla turned away from the fallen warlord without triumph. Her eyes swept across the shocked audience once, impassively. She walked out of the arena before the announcer could even declare the match. In the command chamber, Doval rubbed his temples slowly. "Cancel the rest of the demonstration matches." A junior officer stammered. But sir, what about the Apex delegation? They just watched their god bleed. They won't ask again. The silence clung to the corridors long after Kayla had vanished from view. Some called it the shortest match in Apex history. Others refused to call it a match at all. The footage would be studied frame by frame in war colleges, with analysts arguing about leverage, timing, and biomechanics. But none of that explained what unnerved them most. It was the way she had stood still. For 15 seconds, she had let a legend bare his teeth. She had waited. Not from fear. Not from doubt. Because she knew. Now, every officer aboard the Judicator understood something essential. Kayla had not just beaten Corthuan. She had ended his myth. And myths didn't die easily. Corthuan's body was still being stabilized in medbay when the broadcasts began. Across 36 star systems, the footage had already leaked, shared by a trembling communications officer too stunned to consider protocol. The final frame. The Apex warlord suspended midair, mouth slack, eyes wide, a Deathworlder girl pivoting out of the frame before he hit the ground. No special effects. No dramatic soundtrack. Just one kick, raw and unfiltered. In the officer's mess, no one spoke. Forks paused midair. Cups trembled against teeth. The silence wasn't reverent, it was bewildered. Corthuan was a fixed point in the galactic power structure, a force accepted, if not welcomed. If he could fall. Kayla sat alone in the gravity chamber. Not resting, not celebrating. She was suspended upside down by her ankles, using the artificial field to train balance in unpredictable orientations. Her hair drifted below her in the soft hum of controlled pressure. She counted seconds, breathing between them. She wasn't thinking about Corthuan. He had been predictable. She was thinking about the ones who would come next. Rel stood by the entrance, tablet pressed to his chest like a shield. He hesitated before speaking. You know they won't let this end here. Kayla shifted position, toes flexing to correct her posture. I know. The Apex aren't just going to accept this. You humiliated their strongest. They'll send someone worse. Something worse. Kayla let her body fall forward, flipping gracefully to the ground. She landed silently. They're welcome to try. Rel took a cautious step closer. Why did you let him speak so long? She wiped a bead of sweat from her temple. Words are distractions. I needed to see his rhythm, the way he moved when he thought no one was watching. His hips were slow. He led with emotion. And the kick? He asked, almost afraid of the answer. I broke the jaw to disorient. The vertebra to paralyze. I wanted him alive enough to understand what happened. That's the difference between defeat and destruction. Rel looked down. You scare them. The whole ship's rattled. I'm not here to comfort anyone. She left the chamber without waiting for a reply. Elsewhere, in the dim-lit halls of Apex Command, the Council roared in disbelief. Their champion shattered in front of lesser species. Their response was immediate. The footage was declared fabricated. A propaganda tactic. An insult. But beneath the noise, in quiet corridors and encrypted channels, even they knew. Corthuan had been real. The break in his spine was real. The silence in his eyes before the med drones reached him was real. The Federation requested Kayla's presence at a closed council session 2 days later. Not to question her actions. They couldn't afford to challenge her now, but to decide what to do next. She arrived dressed as always. Black fiber suit, no insignia, no weapons. Admiral Doval met her at the entrance. You understand they won't ask questions. They'll ask for explanations you can't give. I'll give them what they need, she replied. Inside, the air was dense with uncertainty. Representatives from 8 species sat in a semicircle, posture stiff, eyes sharp. Holograms of the duel hovered silently behind them. Kayla of Gara Prime, said a diplomat with too much authority and not enough spine. Do you comprehend the political gravity of your actions? She did not blink. He challenged. I responded. Why didn't you show restraint? I did. The murmuring behind the table stopped. Another official leaned forward, fingers laced. You've embarrassed a military partner. We now face diplomatic tension with the Apex Confederacy. I wasn't aware humiliation was a recognized war crime, Kayla said, tone flat. Doval's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. The diplomats exchanged glances, unsure how to navigate a conversation with someone who didn't lie, flatter, or submit. She offered no apologies. Only facts. What do you intend to do next? Someone finally asked. Kayla looked at them with a calm that unnerved even the synthetic interpreters. Train. Wait. Improve. There was no pride in her voice. No eagerness. Just inevitability. As she left the council hall, whispers followed her. The woman who broke the Apex warlord. The girl who waited 15 seconds and ended an empire's symbol with one motion. She didn't care for titles. On her way back to her quarters, she passed a group of Marines in the corridor. They stepped aside instinctively, even though she made no move toward them. One of them, not much older than she was, couldn't help himself. Was it worth it? Kayla paused. Her head tilted slightly, considering. It was necessary. And she walked on, leaving a silence thicker than fear in her wake. They came for her at night. Not in secrecy. No shadows, no poisoned drinks. The Apex had never believed in quiet vengeance. They made their retaliation visible, grand, theatrical. A war cruiser appeared in orbit above the Nexus Judicator, black and gold hull gleaming with malice. Its signal was a single transmission: she will answer for the dishonor. 1 week. Prepare her. Doval called an emergency meeting. She's not property, he snapped, pacing before the senior officers. We can't hand her over like a bargaining chip. They don't want a prisoner, Rel said quietly. They want a rematch. One officer scoffed. After what happened to Korthuan? This won't be another warrior, Rel replied. They've created something else. Kayla sat silently as they spoke, legs folded, eyes closed. They discussed her fate in the room like she was a weapon in storage, too dangerous to use, too political to ignore. Finally she spoke. I'll go. Doval turned to her. You don't have to. We can invoke asylum. They won't stop. She opened her eyes, calm as ever. This is the only language they understand. Let them speak it. Rel tried to hide the tremor in his voice. At least let us prepare you. This time, we know they're engineering something beyond natural biology. Kayla rose to her feet. Then I'll train. For 6 days, she vanished into the deeper decks of the ship. The Judicator's crew avoided her path. Even the security cams blacked out when she entered the hull's lower recesses. The only person who dared find her was Rel, who entered on the 5th day, tablet in hand and dread in his heart. She was balancing on one hand at the edge of a gravity well chamber, her body bent backward, suspended in impossible stillness. They're calling it a sovereign class, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Spliced with predator DNA, shielded with reactive nanofiber. It doesn't speak. Just hunts. Kayla held the pose a second longer, then flipped upright. Good, she said. He stepped forward. You don't have to win. You just have to survive long enough for the Federation to intervene. Kayla looked at him. I didn't come this far to survive. The final day arrived like a trial etched into time. The Judicator lowered its shields as the Apex drop pod descended, a black sphere of glistening metal, its landing impact shattering the arena floor before the match had even begun. From the pod stepped a creature that barely resembled a soldier. Twice Korthuan's mass, its joints twitched like coiled serpents. Its eyes were artificial, glowing red slits scanning for weakness. No words. No rituals. It walked forward and waited. Kayla entered the arena barefoot. She had requested no suit enhancements, no exoskeleton, no weapons. Just the gravity turned to 1.8 gs, her native weight. The crowd watched through reinforced glass, though no one admitted they expected her to win. They weren't sure victory was possible anymore. They only hoped she would survive long enough to prove the Apex could bleed again. The signal flared. The creature moved first. Fast. Too fast. Kayla sidestepped the initial strike by a margin so thin it blurred on replay. She ducked under a clawed sweep, pivoted on her heel, and drove an elbow into its ribcage. The sound was wrong. Like striking living metal. It turned and struck her across the shoulder. She flew back, hit the wall hard. Still, she rose. Its next charge split the floor open. She slid under its reach, kicked upward into its exposed knee. The joint bent unnaturally, but it didn't slow. It grabbed her leg mid-motion and slammed her down. Glass cracked. Rel stood from his seat, fists clenched. Kayla rolled, just barely avoiding the follow-up crush. She was breathing hard now, blood at the corner of her mouth. The Sovereign class turned its head, calculating. That was its mistake. It expected a pause. Expected her to flinch. She launched forward with a flurry of movement that defied inertia. 2 strikes to the side of the head. 1 to the throat. Then a final pivot into a rising knee that connected with the synthetic jaw. For a split second, it staggered. Kayla didn't let it recover. She moved behind it, scaled its back like a jungle predator, drove her fingers into the exposed joint where its shoulder met its frame. Sparks exploded. It shrieked, its first sound. She dropped just as it spun and fired a needle of bone through the space she'd been. Her foot swept under. She trapped its leg. Then she kicked. Hard. Its balance faltered. Its knee bent inward, and she struck the base of its skull, twice, 3 times, until its systems began to overload. It lashed out blindly, but she was already behind it again, driving her heel into the precise spot between plating seams. One final hit. Its body collapsed forward, twitching, then still. Silence. The room didn't cheer. No one dared. Kayla stood over the motionless behemoth, breath ragged, arms trembling. Blood soaked her side. Her left eye was swelling shut. But she didn't fall. She looked at the Apex envoy behind the glass. They looked back, and lowered their gaze. She had done what no warship, no treaty, no peace council ever had. She made them yield. Kayla turned and walked out alone, every step echoing louder than applause.